My name is Lori Sanderlin. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the manager of the North Carolina Maritime Museum at Southport. If you went over and knocked on the door at 2 o'clock, we closed. We have all of the information for this program on all of our doors at the museum, so we were hoping to get as much support as possible to come over here. So as I kicked everyone out of the museum at 2 o'clock, I told them to follow me over here. But I would like to introduce, I'm kind of a fan. But David and I have known each other for 15 years. And we've known each other for 15 years now. David is a graduate of Duke University and Harvard. He was recently the co-recipient with Tim Tyson of the North Carolina Literary and Historical Association Crittenden Award for Lifetime Achievement. He hangs out in Durham sometimes, but he and my husband have something in common. They share a home place in Carteret County, North Carolina, which also holds a special place in my heart. Speaking of hearts, Dr. Soselsky has a true passion for the past, and his books include The Fire of Freedom, Abram Galloway and the Slave Civil War, The Waterman's Song, Slavery and Freedom in Maritime North Carolina, A Historian's Coast, Adventures in the Tidewater Past. He co-edited with Timothy B. Tyson, Democracy Betrayed, The Women's Race Riot of 1898 and Its Legacy, Along Freedom Road, Hyde County, North Carolina, and the Fate of Black Schools in the South. And he also co-edited with Sharon, William Henry Singleton's Recollections of My Slavery Days. Clearly, he is a prolific writer and has an extraordinary web presence, if you have not noticed. It has several stories on history, photographs, and images, but by far I have fallen in love with his blog, which is called Love in the Archives. So I've been hooked ever since, and if you have an opportunity, I strongly suggest you go online and check out his website, davidsoselsky.com. More reading than you could ever imagine, incredible images, lots of great stories. I should stop talking now because it is my honor to introduce to you Dr. David Soselsky as he presents Menhaden Stories in the spirit of Captain Eugene Gore.
How is everybody? It's nice to be back in Southport. It's nice to be part of this event again. It's one of my favorite things. I appreciate the Maritime Museum for having me. Donnie and all I'm gonna, where's my brother? There's one. I want to recognize my brother and my sister-in-law, Richard and Sandy. They live on the other side of the river, but they like to come over here. And Richard is the founder of Carolina Ocean Studies. Which if you haven't, Google out and check it out. He has helped in introducing the shore and marine life and the importance of a strong and healthy environment to school children. For 27 years now, the number of children in the hundreds of thousands. Sandy, after retiring as the marine biology and oceanography teacher at Ashley High School a year or two ago, is now actually running the business. It's helping him. It's also a special pleasure to be here with my new friend Marion Evans in the audience. She gave me, if you weren't here earlier, she gave me the tour of, I'm going to call it Bolivia, but in my head, I'm really thinking Piney Grove. And it really opened up a whole new world to me yesterday. I can't tell you, and if you couldn't make her presentation this morning, get her to your group, get her to your, it's awesome. I'm going to try to, this is going to be mostly stories, if that's all right, and I'm going to do sort of four things in a You'll seem like no time at all. And the first I'm going to do just a little introduction to the industry and show a few pictures. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about Captain Gore, some of whose family is here today, I'm honored to say. And then the third part we're going to talk about smelly, maggoty fish. That's the real draw for most people when they come to hear my talk. And I'm going to finish with a talk that I wrote. I'm going to do a little piece of a talk that I wrote a few years ago. I was asked to be part of an effort to commemorate really the end of the Menhaden industry in Beaufort, near where we're from. And the last factory in the state closed. And after it took, it said it took them 5 years before they were really ready to deal with what that meant. But not me, community people went around and did interviews with dozens and dozens of people that were involved in the industry in different ways. And then they had kind of a homecoming, calling it a celebration, is a bit much, celebration and commemoration. And they asked me to put all those stories together, and I'm just going to share a little piece of that with you. So let's start with the pictures and a little bit about the industry. Some of you are going to know everything I'm going to say, like you're going to know it all, and others. So for the ones that don't, Menhaden are small little silvery fish like herring. The Menhaden fishing industry started in the way that you came to know it in Southport in the 1870s and 1880s up in New England. Native Americans and on back have been using Menhaden for fertilizer. It's never really been much of a food fish. It's been used for fertilizer, oil, industrial products, emulsions. If you eat fish oil, if you use fish oil, if you your medicines sometimes come in it. And for almost a century, it was the largest commercial saltwater fishery in North Carolina. And the only two places in North Carolina, kind of three, Beaufort, Morehead City, and Southport were the centers of the industry. And the early people that started the factories and things of that sort, most of them had come out of New England. As the fishery played out up there, they moved from New York and Connecticut and Jersey down here. It was America's second industrial fishery, with whaling being the first. So we're not talking about people throwing out, we're talking about a massive operation in which they're bringing in millions of fish. They're bringing them into factories where they're then processed into oil and flakes and other products, and then being sent off to be used for all kinds of things. So let's start with a few pictures just so you get a sense of what it looked like. This is, thanks to Donnie, I know some of these things. Donnie. Pokey Reeves, I believe. Pokey Reeves. In 1939 here in Southport, and he was one of the kids who used to, some of you, y'all are too young to remember any of it. Just not. The kids used to hang out when this was all shrimp houses. And when the shrimp were, while they were waiting for the shrimp boats to come in, they would play on the waterfront. When the boats came in, their job was to cull through the shrimp, take out the fish, which they got to take to their mamas. Or a lot of fish. And then they would carry the fish into the house where their mamas and their aunts and their grandmamas would peel them at the fish houses in the counties. Let's see if I can figure out this. And most of you know that Southport, for many years, claimed to be the largest shrimp port in the world. And Lori's going to come help me with this. Every time we were practicing it, she would go, just do this. And I would go, and it didn't happen, and she would do it, and it worked. Okay. I only want to make a few points. We're going to go through this quick.
Oh, no, you're fine.
Let me bring you a chair. We got a chair. I just want to make a few points about these. In many ways, the Menhaden industry was continuing a tradition of African American maritime life, fishing life, that went back centuries. Before the Civil War, the vast majority of commercial fishermen in North Carolina would have been African American. 80% plus, perhaps. This is a scene, those would have been all, this is before the Civil War, up on Albemarle Sound. These were all African American fishermen. The net they're using would have been about a mile long. They're going after herring and shad. And all African American. On Albemarle Sound alone, there would have been 4,000 to 5,000 African American fishermen.
All slaves?
A lot, it was a mix. A lot of them were slaves, a lot of them were free African Americans. That's a long story, but yeah. And they would live on the banks. They would move down and work there for two or 3 months for maybe a 7 or 8 county area. Let's go. Same here. This was one of the first images that led me to my book, The Waterman Song. This is an island off of Beaufort, and here you have a mullet fishing camp. It's half black, half black. There's 11 black guys, 11 white guys living together for 2 or 3 months a year every fall. And there would have been camps like this all the way from here to Ocracoke Island. Of course, what happened out in the island was a lot different than what would have been tolerated in town. All the rules were off out here, and they wanted to make money. So they wanted the best fishermen. Okay, let's keep going. And I just like this image. This is from the same set of drawings of that first one I showed you. This would have been one of the, while the African American men were catching those fish on Albemarle Sound. As soon as they brought them in, women and children, this woman's name was Betsy Sweat, would be cleaning them. And if they were lucky, they'd finish before the next set came in. A set in that fishery took, if it was quick, it took 6 hours. It might take 12 hours. It was not uncommon to catch 100,000 fish in a set. The record I've seen is 500,000 in the set. You're talking, most of it was going to be salted and sent out. So, as much as any other industry, the Menhaden industry carried that tradition of African Americans fishing in maritime life into the modern age. When in a lot of other areas, black fishermen were cut out. Okay, I'm going to go through these quickly. This is a typical Menhaden boat, 1935. This is the Governor Moorhead. This is just off here. Yeah, let's keep going. Same age. Some of y'all will recognize this image, I'm sure. This is also 1939. I think, thanks to Donnie, I know that the man fourth from the left is Ernest Joyner.
Yes.
Ernest Joyner. And you're going to get a better picture of him in a second, but some of you will also know, you can see half his face on the left. That's Mihai Gore, Elias Gore. We'll have a better, and so this is the mess hall on a typical Menhaden boat. This is the Governor Moorhead again. The white man in the back is Captain Erickson. He was the captain. My guess is he was a Norwegian immigrant. There were a lot of, Southport and Beaufort had a number of Norwegian and Swedish fishermen move in the 1920s. Let's keep going. For those of you that don't know, just like with whaling, that's how you found Menhaden back in that day. You stand up there and you see them, which may sound strange, but keep going. Oh, okay, well, 1 second. This is Elias Gore, knee-high Gore again, and that's a purse boat. You'll see in a second. The mama boat, the mother boat, would go out, like the Governor Moorhead. It would carry 2 purse boats. When it saw the fish, it lowered the boats. They go out and surround the fish with what was called a purse net, catch the fish, bring them back to the mother boat. The front there is just what they call a bumper, so the boat doesn't push up too hard against the mother boat. Elias Gore, as anyone who's been to the Maritime Museum should know, was supposed to be the biggest man on earth. He was in the Guinness Book of World Record as the biggest man on earth. How big was he? 7, 8, and he doesn't look, you know how some people who are really tall look, being holy or something? They paid him 2 men's worth. And Donnie introduced me to some of the guys that worked with him, and they were all like, he was gentle, and if anyone, whenever there was a fight on the boat or anything else, he would just kind of lift him up. He said he was a peacemaker. He didn't have to hurt anybody to be a peacemaker. Okay. Here they are. So they've seen the fish. They're lowering the first boats. This shows one of the boats. That's how dense the Menhaden, which I should have said are also around here. I think they call them moss bunkers a lot. They call them pogey a lot. That black spot is Menhaden. And the 2 ends of that net are the purse boats. And it's amazing, isn't it? I mean, that's a lot of fish. Keep going. Okay, here they've surrounded the fish and they've brought the net together and they've come up against the side of the mother boat. So the fish are still in the water, but they're down under the water and the net is still mostly out. It's underneath the boat. It's in the triangle. Here they are bringing it up. And needless to say, you'll notice that all these fishermen are African American. Typical crews, 20, 21 guys. 18 of those guys are going to be African American. This is what's called the bail net. It can hold, to give you a sense of the amount of fish, a bail net can hold about 3,000 pounds of fish. That's just one scoop. They're lifting it up now. Now here they are. They're bringing in the net. They're going to tighten it up. This is when they would be. Many of you may know that the Menhaden fishermen were kind of famous for their songs, for their work songs. And this is when you're going to be singing to help coordinate. Yeah. Okay. That's the whole of Menhaden boat. So that's there you're talking about that's just like the fish inside. When the boats got in, one of the treats that my cousins used to talk about was that when they came in, especially during hard times like the Depression, they often let local people come in, and while they waited to unload the fish, people could come in and they called it break row, and take the fish row out. There wasn't really a market for it, but it helped people. And usually there would, except in 1 or 2 ornery fish, in the case of 1 or 2 ornery fish house owners, factory owners, it was that's fine. There was no charge for it. You could just come in and do it. All they wanted was the fish. This is a view. They're down from the crow's nest of the mother boat. While they're doing that, they're going to bring the bail net over the hole, and then a trip wire will open it up. That is a boat coming in. That's actually coming in toward Beaufort. See how low that boat is in the water? They are making some money that day if they get in, which they did not always get in. That's just a typical Menhaden. That was actually down east, North Carolina, east of Beaufort. But this was an industrial thing. That's what a hoagie factory looks like. Okay, let's stop here. And that's Capt Eugene Gore. Can his family stand up? I'm not sure who all's here. I met a sister. I met a son and a daughter. I want y'all invited back so I can just hear their stories. So I want to interview them up here in front of y'all. Just coming in, they were telling me stories, and I was like, I wish I didn't have to go do a talk now. For our second part of our show tonight, I wrote an article. So, I used to do an oral history column for the Raleigh News and Observer in the Sunday paper, and I featured Captain Gore in that series once upon a time. And if you'll put up with me, I'm just going to read a little piece of that. And what I did with those stories, I would usually write a little introduction, and then I would actually use the person's own words, like a long quote. So in this case, what you're going to hear are Captain Gore's own words, as he told them to me. And he fished all over. He fished from New Jersey to Texas. Come on in. And as many of you know, he was one of the first African American captains here. In general, there was African American leadership in the Menhaden fishery before any other industry I know anywhere in the South. And Captain Gore kind of addresses why that is. I'll get to that. But just saying that, well, usually we're not supposed to have, back in the day, you're not supposed, the idea of having an African American captain was just not what you're supposed to be doing, right? So, these are Captain Eugene Gore's works. As a young boy, I liked to go out on the boat more or less to eat and help out my granddad. He was a cook on a Menhaden boat. As long as I was young enough to stay in the kitchen, I liked it. But if a captain is short a man and a boy was out on the boat, he'd tell him to get in the net. The first time I looked at all that net, I said, that's too much net for men to have to pull back by hand. The more I pulled it, the more determined I was not to pull that net all my life. His son, Colonel Gore, just told me before that he worked with his daddy when he was young. He was like, well, that taught me that I didn't want to be in. The Menhaden business was the only industry they had here. He means Southport. During that time, you go fishing or you go work on somebody's farm. Big muscles and strong backs. Them are the kind of men they hired. Of course, you couldn't go out there with a boatload of green men. Somebody was liable to get killed. Before I was a captain, I was a mate. The first time I got some experience as a mate was in 1950 or 51. The mate, he's in one of the purse boats that go catch the fish. You got a mate in one and a captain in one. Half the men in this one, half the men in that one. You drop off and leave the big boat there drifting. You go around the fish and meet way over there. And when you got the net closed up under them, you pull and pull and pull. We're talking about a mess of fish. If they show that color on the water like a big red spot, and if it's got any size, I tell you what, shoot. That's how he said it. You load those old wooden boats down with pokey and then fill the decks up and water be running across the decks, back and forth across the boat. I carried a crew from Moorhead, some of them from Beaufort, but most of them from right here in Brunswick County. But when the men would leave and go home because they weren't making any money, then people come stand around the dock, maybe some from Angola prison and everywhere. Some of them were nice people. Some of them were kind of rough. Angola prison, you know, it's a state penitentiary in Mississippi. But that's how far he worked. Mississippi or Louisiana? Louisiana. Oh, I have seen some rough weather. The only time I really worried about the crew is when the Dewey caught fire. Colonel Gore was on the boat. I know, you're like, why am I talking? She burnt with me in the Gulf of Mexico right off. You're going to have to help me with this too. Calashoo River.
Calcasieu.
All those things. It was in 1956. She had one of those old donkey engines in the back that got a fire, and you couldn't put it out. I got them to lower the first boats down and get in. The boss man, he told me I done right. He said, "You didn't lose a man?" And I said, "No, I did not." He said, "We can build another boat, but it takes 21 years to build a man." He's the guy who gave me a chance to be a captain. You know, God works in mysterious ways, His wonders to perform. I don't care how bad a group you get in, there's somebody in there that sympathizes with black people. I know that from experience. He called me at home one day. He said, "Gene, I want you to go captain on the Dewey." I said, "Ooh, I don't know, Captain." He said, "I already talked with Gordon." He meant my captain. He said he hated to see you leaving, but he said he'd be less than a man to hold you back. Black man as a captain in 1953, 54, that was a high position. Black man in charge of 20, 30 head of men. See, there's one thing that the white man learned. He learned to look at money. He ain't going to get the Rotary Club people to do that hard work. I hope there's somebody here in the Rotary Club. You didn't see no white men way back yonder in the net. The only white men in that boat were the captain, and the engineer, and the pilot. And not always that. And see, if you get a black mate, that's going to get you a crew. And you got to have the crew to make the money. Let me tell you a story about what it was like out there. In the fall of '58, it looked like we were going to have a bad season. Nobody had no fish that fall. The spotter plane, by that point they were starting to use airplanes to look for the fish. The spotter plane would fly way up to Chesapeake Bay and back and not see anything. The fleet would run up as far as Womble Shoal buoy up on the other side of Ocracoke, then turn around, head back south to Beaufort. One day I turned around there and all them fast boats were way ahead of me. See, my old boat, the Simpson Brothers, was slower than a lot of boats. Well, that evening, them fish popped up, them big rowboats. The plane man said, "Oh Lord, that's all you want right here." He said the Simpson Brothers and one other boat are the only two boats that can get back there before night and get a set. Boy, the rest of them captains were going crazy and ready. Oh man, I had them on. Made one set, boy. It was breezing up northeast and fogging up, and I passed Hazard's Light. I was in the deep, and she had a big hole in her too. She was a wet boat. But I got her in the boat. I was the first one to carry in a load of fish that season. That's when it paid to have a slow boat. Sound like your dad? So part 3, something a little different, but the same. I also did a story on a different part of the Menhaden industry. And especially early on, an awful lot of it went to fertilizer factories. And some years ago, and also as part of the same oral history series, I did a story on a gentleman from Nebraska up here that was about life in the fertilizer factory. And I thought I'd share that with you to kind of connect the dots a little bit. His name was Clarence Alston. I visited him in Nebraska when he was 95 years old. And as you know, Nebraska is still a quite little African American community. The fertilizer industry there started in 1869, and there were several big fertilizer factories there over the years. The company's name, the first company, the Navassa, is called Navassa Guano Company, which guano is technically bird food. But by the time it got in the fertilizer industry, they used to go like to these rocky islands where the birds were, South America and things, and they did that. But they kept calling it guano even after they put all kinds of things in it, including a lot of Menhaden from here, especially in Southport. And Nebraska is a little island, hardly an island. I think it's between Jamaica and Haiti. And it was one of the places where they actually got bird droppings from. That's where the name of the company and the community comes from. So this part is going to be, the part I'm going to read you is the gentleman's name is Clarence Alston, and these are his words. Oh, I do need to tell you one thing. He's going to mention somebody that up there is still famous, but I don't know if people have heard of him down here. Robert Williams. Robert Williams was a legend up there, at least, was a legendary African-American figure back like in the Depression era, the 20s, 30s, who was kind of a Robin Hood type person. Stole from the rich and gave to the poor. Famous for carrying 2 pistols in his belt. So anyway, he's going to mention Robert Williams at one of them. So these are Mr. Alston's words. I was 9 years old when I moved down here to Nebraska. He had come from East Arcadia, I think. It was 1919, the year after World War I closed. Nebraska was a big place back then. It had a big fertilizer factory, and we lived right outside the gate. People called it Bluff Hill, the Bluff. The Bluff had about 15 tenant houses and maybe 3 bunk houses. And if you didn't work there, you couldn't live there. I stayed there with my grandmother. Her name was Elizabeth Weston. She used to be a slave. There was nothing to do around here but fertilizer. People left the farm and came to work in the fertilizer mill. And Virginia, Carolina, that was one of the name of one of the companies, fertilizer companies, used to have a boat running back and forth to Wilmington to bring hands up there. The boat was named the Kinston, and the captain named Mac McKenzie. There used to be a lot of hobos coming through here, catching freight trains, going different places. They'd stop off down there and get a job to the fertilizer plant, and then they'd send back and get the family. They came from everywhere, all up the road, like East Arcadia, Acton, places like that. I was 11 years old when I first started to work at the factory. See, back then they could work boys and women too. Me and my buddy Capt, we would roll wheelbarrows full of fish scrap. Fish scrap is dried and hated. After you press the oil out, you dry out the rest, what's left, and that's fish scrap. So me and my buddy Capt, we would roll wheelbarrows full of fish scrap. Sometimes we used to have 300 pounds on a wheelbarrow. The ships used to come in and bring sulfur. They'd unload the sulfur and carry it over to the place they called the chamber. In the chamber, they used to burn sulfur and make acid. The acid would be in a big old vat, bigger than this house. Then they'd run that liquid to the plant where the phosphate rock was at. Yeah, that's the plant. That's the plant just a little before Mr. Alston. They would run the phosphate rocks through the mill and make a dust like flour. Then they mix that phosphate rock and the acid together. That would be the base for the batch. That would always be in it. Then they'd start to put in the ammonia solution, nitrate of soda, cottonseed oil, fish scrap, tobacco stems, stuff like that. They used to put all that stuff in fertilizer. He didn't mean in every batch of fertilizer. They'd make a lot of different kinds of fertilizer, okay? Different combinations. They would, they used to send half-raw fish there in boxcars. Talk about Menhaden. We call it fish scrap. We used to unload it with pitchforks. It used to have maggots in it when we opened the door. It would smell terrible. To tell you the truth, what we used to do after I started going out in the evenings, I used to get pine needles, pine branches, brush them, and set them on fire out there. I'd stand up in the smoke to kill the scent off the fish scraps. Then I could take my bath and put on my clothes. I don't know if I told you, Richard, but our cousin Estel said the exact same thing. And he used to go break road down in Morehead City, and he said the same thing, that the only way to get the smell off to go if you were seeing a girl was burn pine branches. Some girls would have liked it. Or not, I don't know. Nebraska didn't have anything but a little country store and the churches, Mount Calvary and Davis Chapel. But we used to have little house parties, people playing guitars and things like that. Like that place you showed me yesterday in the living room. I'm not saying where. Later, the piccolo came out. They take one of them houses, put a piccolo, and that's an old name for a jukebox. Put a piccolo in there, and you could go and dance, sell sodas, cut resin. They also had a place called the Cook Shop. A lady named Miss Vic Wells used to run that. And later on, my mother used to run it. It was right inside the factory yard. They served country food, soul food. Around here, they still talk about a man who came on Nebraska after the war. He wasn't over hardly 5 feet tall. I imagine 140 pounds. Used to wear silk shirts, John D. Stetson box suits. His name was Robert Williams, but they give him the nickname We'll Shoot a Pistol. He had just got out of the Army and he carried 2 .45 automatics. White people were scared of him. That's who he was after. But around here, he was kind of a Robin Hood. Take from the rich, give to the poor. They put him in jail 2 or 3 times, but he'd get out. Back then, these country stores used to ship stuff in freight cars. He'd break into the box cars, take stuff and throw it out of the box cars so people could get it. There'd be cheese, candy, clothes, household items, different things like that. A lot of people lived off that stuff. I met him personally. Back then, the guy that ran the cook shop was a man named Benjamin Blaney. He used to have games up there on Sundays, see? And my mother would cook something to eat for them. She'd be cooking, and they'd be drinking Coca-Cola and liquor, and things like that. We'll Shoot a Pistol used to come in there. He'd go there and kiss Mama, and then go in there with the rest of them, drinking and things. Sometimes he had those 2 .45 automatics in his coat pocket. See, I'd be around the cook shop shining shoes for a nickel. He's the first man that gave me a lead dollar for a shoe shine. Had on a pair of black Stacey Adams shoes. He was nice to everybody. Black. This is a joke, but it's true. See, We'll Shoot a Pistol used to go to Bo West's house on the bluff and get whiskey. Now, Bo West had a lady staying next door named Amanda Hooper, and she used always to be talking about We'll Shoot a Pistol. She was scared of it. She used to be asking all the time, have they got him yet? Have they got him yet? But that night, Bo didn't have any liquor, so he's sitting right next door to Amanda Hoop. He said, you go right next door to that lady there, tell her what you want. Tell her I sent you. He went around there and he told her. She went and gave him the liquor, and he paid her good. She told him, come again. And she asked him, who might you be? The nice young man dressed so nice. He said, my name is Robert Williams. But people call me Will Shooter. And the woman fell right off her head. I know that's true. That's the end of his gospel. You with me so far? So, for the last part I want to do, I want to read a little piece of I told you I went through all the interviews with the people who were in the last Menhaden factory in North Carolina. A lot of them would have spent a lot of time in Southport. A lot of them were from Southport. As you'll see in this talk, it was like it was one world. If you were in the hoagie business, it was one world all the way from New Jersey to Texas. And we'll talk about that. The talk was called "Music All Over the Ocean," and that's a quote that you'll hear. So I don't have time to read the whole thing, so I'm going to kind of start in the middle. Hopefully it'll work. And in this case, it's me talking, not Mr. Alston or Capt. Gore. Bobby Chambers, a Menhaden fisherman who fished for Standard Products, remembered, I was taught a lot of things by the older fishermen that experienced fishing back when they had the wooden boats and when they had to pull the nets by hand and salt the nets. Mr. Chambers, like almost everybody I'm quoting here, is African American. He says, I'll never forget the stories they told me. Recalling his Menhaden fishing days when he worked 6 months a year in the Gulf of Mexico and was back home the other 6 months. He said, to sit back and hear those guys at night, you pretty much forgot about the hard day. Everybody would play cards or sit around and eat fish or talk fishing stories or tell a few stories that weren't true. But you know it was all fun. And then at the end of the season, you hated to leave because the guys were going in their direction and you were going in yours, and you were just hoping that you would see these guys next year. The sense of family in the industry was not limited to Southport or Beaufort either. As one old fisherman put it, the Menhaden industry was, and I quote, a boundless community of fishing people. Menhaden fishing was a thread that connected coastal towns from Maine to Texas. The stories I heard in their interviews brought to life all the other historic fishing ports where Beaufort and Southport boats carried local men. I listened to tales of hurricanes in Empire, Louisiana, waterspouts off Sabine, is that how you say it? Sabine, Texas. Girlfriends in Pascagoula, Mississippi, and sharing apartments with Cuban, Portuguese, and Swedish fishermen in Port Monmouth, New Jersey. The guys married girls in Lewis, Delaware, had babies in Apalachicola, Florida, and bailed cousins out of the county jail in Reedsville, Virginia. News spread quickly among the Menhaden fishing towns, too. It was almost like you were in the same town, a fisherman named Lee Crumbacker recalled. The hardest part of Menhaden fishing, I heard over and over again, was spending so much time away from their families. I never got used to leaving my family, Bobby Chambers said. He went on to explain, because after 6 months, you'd come home for 6 months, and it seemed like time would go by so fast, then all of a sudden you had to leave again. And to leave your family was pretty much a hard thing. My daughter has graduated from college, and my son is getting out of high school, so they can look back now and say, Daddy did what he did to take care of us. Because I just hated to see them cry when I would leave, but they understand now. There was, of course, No shortage of stories about hard work in those interviews either. It was a man's job, believe me, Bobby Chambers said. Out there it was hard because you had to get right back up from sun up to sundown. As long as the sun was up and the plane spotter could spot fish, you would fish. In the Gulf it was often hot. Up here it was often cold. This is a quote. At nights we were so tired we couldn't sleep. King Davis, who's another African-American first mate, he remembered. We'd stay up and make up shanty songs. He remembered days so cold that in his words, the ropes, and I quote, would cut your hands so you could see the bone and not feel it. At night, they rubbed alcohol on their hands to get the feeling back in them. Before the days of power blocks and hardening rigs, the captains needed big, strong men in the net. These were real men, Lee Crumbacker recalled. The factory was no picnic either. One factory man, Randy Jackson, explained, and I quote, "It was hard and nasty. You had to like it to stay there. When you had to do something like fix a raw box chain, there'd be maggots, chain grease, fish oil, spider webs. When the head of the factory's dump room, Elwood Simpson, this is a quote, walked across the floor, you could hear the maggots cracking under his feet," Jackson recalled. Jackson also said, "I can tell you they loved him. It's like his little world, and he was the best at it." I also heard stories that sent chills down my spine. Every Menhaden fisherman recalled a storm where they lost a friend or thought they had lived their own last day. Many recalled a particular storm. Elvin Jones, Andrew Reels, and King Davis all remembered a day in 1963 when they were on the Shinnecock. Waves as high as the building would not let the boat cross the bar. They all thought they would never see home again. Water had come across the hull and the boat was underwater. This is a quote. Crew was hollering and screaming. That's from King Davis, who was the first mate. I told him it was all right. He said that I had already given up. Another incident that stuck out for me was something that happened to a fisherman named Lee Crumbacker in the fall of 1974. He had been working on a boat called the Atlantic Queen in Chesapeake Bay, but it's from down here. And she was headed back to North Carolina when a cold front came through and stirred up 15 to 20-foot waves with hardly any warning at all. They had just made a big set off Redan, which is like a resort beach on the Outer Banks. But the storm came on so quick that Lee was caught in his purse boat. They didn't have time to bring the two boats back up to another boat. And they couldn't get back in. The wind and waves drove both purse boats into the breakers. I had already given up, he said. I remember thinking, he said, he looked at the shore, and he said, I remember thinking there are all these people up there on the island at restaurants and motels, and they're having a good time, and I'm going to die. I thought Bobby Chambers, he was one of the youngest guys interviewed. He was a guy maybe in his 40s. I thought Bobby Chambers had an especially lyrical way of describing the small moments in the Menhaden fishermen's lives in a way that got close to the heart of things. It was really, really hard work, he said. But looking back over it, I really appreciate every day of it. I've seen a lot of stuff and been in places that I'll never forget. Some things you cannot always record down or write down. But in your mind, you'll never forget these things. And I really got to see some beautiful stuff. Things on the water that God created. And then, of course, there was the music. The fishermen mostly stopped singing their shanties with the introduction of power blocks and hardening rigs in the late 1950s and early 60s. But those songs have remained a powerful memory for all who've ever heard them. As a child, the first thing I ever heard about the Menhaden industry was my mother's story, our mother's stories, without those shanties. She grew up in a little place called Harlow in Carter County. In the 1920s and 30s, when the road that goes by there, Highway 101, was still a dirt road. And the Menhaden fishermen used to drive oxen and carts down 101 on their way from their homes in a little community called Craven Corner to the factories in both. Early Monday mornings, long before first light, she would wake up in her bed at the sound of those beautiful, haunting songs and listen to them as the fishermen moved through the darkness and toward the sea. In their interviews, the Menhaden fishermen talked about those shanties in much the same way as my mother. King Davis recalled how they would sing all night long just to keep their minds off the cold and hurt. King said, it just seemed like music was all over the ocean. Captain David Willis, who's still, we were just saying, he's still fishing, he's in his 52nd year. Now he's down in the Gulf, still lives up here. Captain Willis spoke of the shanties in much the same way. He remembered singing with the bunk pullers when he first started in the business. There was just something about those shanties. They made the hair rise up on the back of your neck. His neighbor, Captain George Lewis, people call him Collard Green Lewis, once told him that when he sang the shanties, he felt as if he could push his foot through the purse boat. That's the way I felt too, Captain Willis said. Those songs have not been heard on a Menhaden boat in a long time, but older people from around here still remember them. Cool autumn days, you could sometimes hear them on shore coming across the water. They filled the air, stirred the heart, and got deep inside your bones. And if you heard those songs, like my mother did when she was a little girl, you never forgot them for the way they made you feel. It's hard to put into words, but it was not just the beauty of the melodies or the men's fine voices, but the appearance of the music was rising right out of the sea. A lot of times they couldn't even see the boat, too. So quiet. Beyond the gospel strains or the raunchy, sassy lyrics, they did both kinds. You could hear something more. The men's sense of brotherhood, the feeling of family, their children's tears when they went away, their wives and girlfriends' hugs when they came home, the storms that nearly took their lives, the cold ropes that cut their hands to the bone, the pride that they took in their work. And as Bobby Chambers said, the joy that they took, and I quote, in the beautiful stuff, the things on the water that God has created. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Wow. Every time he comes here, I learn something new. And we really appreciate him being here, and I want to thank the Maritime Museum for getting him here. Thank you, Rory. We have one more event. Mr. Otis Lee, he will be coming up next in a few moments. For those of you who were here earlier, as I say at each one, this is basically based on a zero budget, so we always look for donation.